to about Indianapolis, which doesn't sound too bad with our modern transportation, but going by foot, those 90 miles would have taken weeks, and it would have been a very difficult journey. Now, not only it's really doubtful that they actually just settled on the border of Egypt, and they're like, we're in Egypt, we're good. They would have probably gone as low as Heliopolis or Noph, which is that bottom circle, which would have almost doubled their journey, making it even more difficult. Now, Joseph wasn't doing this out of just blind faith and didn't have the means to do it. Remember, those wise men that came, they actually provided something. It was frankincense, myrrh, and gold. Yeah. Then the thing is, there were probably not 3 wise men. There could have been 3 wise men. There were 3 gifts, but there could have been a whole caravan of wise men. And you can imagine a whole caravan of wise men and bringing gifts of gold. There could have been a lot of financial help that those wise men provided for Jesus in those times. So that's all speculation. It could have been this 3 wise men, but God did provide for them either way for that trip. And why would they have to travel all the way to Egypt? Well, at that time, this man, Herod, was ruling in Judea, and he was a really paranoid guy. He didn't want anybody taking over his throne, even if they didn't even want to take over his throne. If they did anything remotely suspicious, he would have them killed. He had his own 2 sons killed, and his uncle, not to mention a bunch of his other relatives, just because he was scared that they were going to take over his throne and commit treason or something like that. And the funny thing is, Caesar Augustus, the emperor at that time, said about Herod, it would be better to be Herod's pig than his son, because pigs were actually protected by law. And so if you're his son, you would be much more likely to get killed. So it's not surprising when we turn to this passage, Matthew 2, verse 16 through 18, we read about what Herod does. When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Jerusalem, in Bethlehem, and its vicinity, who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. Now, this is why they had to travel for weeks on end just to get to Egypt to find safety from this crazy king. So, eventually, Herod ends up dying, and Joseph gets another dream that we read about in verse 19 through 21. It says, after Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who were trying to take the child's life are dead. So he got up, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. Joseph listened to God again. He wasn't just going to disregard and maybe think, well, it's nice and comfortable in Egypt. We finally went all the way here. Why not just stay where we're at and just enjoy life in Egypt? Things are going well for us here. Joseph still packed up and went without any excuses. And that was Joseph's 3rd dream, to return to Israel. Now, the problem was, well, there was something even worse waiting for them at home, as we'll read in verse 22 to 23. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning in Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Having been warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee. Now, who is this Archelaus guy? Well, he probably looks something like that, according to the sculptors of those times. Archelaus was Herod's son, and somehow he managed to be even worse than his father. And he actually, just to get a glimpse of one of the horrible things he does, he had all the Jews in the temple over Passover, and he ended up massacring 3,000 of them. He was such a bad king that Caesar Augustus actually banished him to Gaul, where he died. But unfortunately for Joseph and Mary, he wasn't banished yet on their trip back to Judea. So Joseph has a fourth dream, to settle in Galilee, which was north of Israel, well, north of Judea. So the original plan was to go from Bethlehem down to Noph, and then back to Bethlehem. That would have been hard enough, but then on the way back they find out Archelaus is a really terrible guy, so they go all the way up to Nazareth, which is where Jesus ended up growing up. Now, this is a really great testament to who Joseph really was. All these detours, all these extra issues that popped up while he was trying to follow God's will. And after every dream that Joseph had, he said, yes, Lord, I will do what you asked me to do because I trust you. Now, there are a few prophecies that we saw in this book, and I wanted to talk about them to see how much of this was really in God's plan from the beginning. That first prophecy about out of Egypt I called my son comes from Hosea 11 verse 1, which says, when Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. Now that is originally talking about Israel and how God delivered the Israelites from Egypt, their slavery in Egypt. But Matthew, by mentioning this verse in his gospel, actually makes a really good point that out of Egypt I called my son doesn't apply just to the Israelites, God's adopted son, but to Jesus, his true son. It's an incredible parallel. And the second prophecy is a little bit more difficult, not quite as clear as this first one. It talks about, it's a reference to Jeremiah 31 verse 15, which says, thus says the Lord, a voice is heard in Ramah, lamentation and bitter weeping. Rachel, weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted for her children, because they are no more. Now what does Rachel and Ramah have to do with Bethlehem and kids getting killed? Well, a lot of that has to do with the importance of who Rachel was to those Jews. She was the mother of the tribes of Israel, of the 12 tribes as we know them. So what does Ramah have to do with that? Well, here's a map of where Ramah is in that region, and Rachel ended up dying in Ramah on the way from Bethel to Jerusalem on that road. And so when she died, she was facing that direction, which incidentally points towards Bethlehem. So it's as if the prophecy says that she is witnessing the horror that was happening in Bethlehem at that time. Now, the passage about Jesus being a Nazarene, and in that passage that we read, that is a little bit more difficult even, because there is no specific passage that says anything about Jesus being in Nazareth or being a Nazarene. However, there is a strong current in certain prophecies, especially in Isaiah, and I'll focus on this particular passage. For Isaiah 53, for he grew up before him like a young plant, and like a root out of dry ground. Now, root out of dry ground could mean something like coming out of a place with little to no fame, like barely anybody knew about it. And he had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. So this is prophecies about the Messiah, and I'm sure everybody was just clamoring to match this description. Oh yeah, nobody's going to like me, let's great to start out with being the Son of God and everything. The thing that this has to do with Nazareth is Nazareth's actual reputation as a town. And its reputation was actually more of a lack of reputation. Barely anybody knew about it. Barely anybody knew anybody that had come out of Nazareth. It was like nobody famous or amazing came out of Nazareth. And we actually get a glimpse of what people thought of Nazareth when we read this passage in John 1:45, which says, Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him of whom Moses in the law and also of the prophets wrote, the Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" So Nathanael, barely knowing anything about Jesus, he assumes, well, Jesus came from Nazareth. What good is he? I mean, he can't be the real Messiah. So if you were growing up, if you were prophesied to be despised and rejected right from the get-go, Nazareth would be the place to grow up. That's how that fulfills the prophecy. Now, I want to focus on two key points this morning about what this passage says about God and what it says about us. First of all, is the fact that God knows what he's doing. And we just read about all these prophecies that were in just this tiny little passage in the Bible that it mentioned. And we see that there's some serious connections in between the New Testament and the Old Testament. In these stories and in these prophecies, we can see that God had a real plan all along for what Joseph and Mary were going through. Even though it didn't seem like it to Joseph and Mary, Joseph probably was thinking like, really? I've come back to Judea after traveling all the way to Egypt, and now there's an even worse king than Herod waiting for me? Like, this is really hard. Like, how can I trust God in this? But he did trust God through it. And that's the second part I want to get to, is that Joseph had a strong example. And he was not mentioned very often in the Bible. Actually, the funny thing about Joseph is that we never hear him saying anything in the biblical accounts. He doesn't have any quotes that belong to him specifically, but what we do have is his ability to obey God no matter what the tough circumstances were, what crazy thing God was calling them to do. And so, the title of my sermon, Now What? What do we have to look forward to? What can we do with our lives now that Christmas is over, now that there's not really as much to look forward to? I think there is something way more amazing to look forward to than just presents or planning the next big party or something like that. And I think that's following the next step of God's amazing plan for your life. Now, I know that some of you may have been feeling this call. You've been feeling a call to something that makes you really uncomfortable, something that you've thrown every excuse at God for. Say, God, I can't do that, I can't work at that place, I don't have the talents for this, I don't have the money for this, I don't have the time for this. Something like that, you've been saying to God, I'm comfortable here. I want to stay in my bubble, where I am. Living this American dream, working towards my own fame, my own power, something like that. Maybe it's not quite that intensely selfish or anything. It might seem totally fine to you. But God, if he's calling you, if he's tugging on your heart to be doing something, odds are sometimes it's hard to find out what God's real will is. But if it's something that's been bugging you lately, that you've been thinking, there's really a big need here, but I can't do it, that's not my job. That might be a sign that it's God's will for your life, that you are part of the solution to that problem. So I want to urge you, stop making excuses. Be more like Joseph, where he responded immediately to what God wanted him to do, and he was protected, he was provided for. And that's not to say that nothing bad will ever happen to you if you're in God's will, but in the end it would be something that you would never regret, something that would bring God's kingdom here more than you could do on your own, living your own, through your own excuses, through your own comforts. I just want to call you to respond to that today. Trust God. Trust in his plan. And trust in the fact that he knows what he's doing. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for